next month's Cobweb webinar. This month we're looking at patching, why patching is your biggest vulnerability, how and why it is important to make sure you're on top of patching, and some of our solutions and resolutions for doing so. My name is Juan Lyle. I'm the commercial manager for managed services here at Cobweb. Shortly, we'll be hearing from Ben Whitmore. I'll thank Ben now for joining us. Ben is a Microsoft MVP and systems architect at Patch My PC. And a bit later on down the track, we'll be hearing from Keir Nolan, who heads up the managed services division here at Cobweb. So the agenda here today will be, we'll cover why patching is so important. We will take a quick look into Cobweb's managed service, of which patching is third-party patching is a key component. We'll be wrapping up there, and then we'll get on to questions. Now, with regards to questions, we've allocated some time at the end to cover off anything that comes up during the session, if we have time to do so. If we don't have time to come to your question, we'll absolutely come back to you in the days to come and make sure everything is covered off. So please do keep any questions coming. I think there's an opportunity to do that in the chat, and we'll cover off as many of those as we possibly can. So before we get passed over to Ben, and before we dive too deeply into third-party patch management and why that's so important, just really wanted to share with you a little observation that we found here at Cobweb when we've canvassed both the market and our customer base. And we found, broadly speaking, it'd be interesting to understand or have you think about where you sit here. But broadly speaking, companies of all sizes fall into two different categories. Now, there are those that are just not monitoring and patching on a regular basis due to other priorities. You'll hear today how time-consuming patching can be, and some people just choose not to do that because they don't have the time to get that covered. Now, that's obviously a dangerous place to be, and ignoring a problem is almost never the right answer, as I'm sure you'll agree. The other side of the coin is people are doing patching, great, but they're spending an awful lot of time in doing that. They're spending an awful lot of time in doing things manually. And so that in itself brings problems. I've yet to find a company for which IT resource is plentiful, where people have nothing to do. And very often patching can be so time consuming, quite an arduous process that when it's done manually, it's done slowly. Time is obviously important. You'll hear about that today. And obviously things are then missed and it's not done competently, for want of a better word. So it'd be interesting to think about where you sit there. Are you doing it? And if you're doing it, how quickly are you doing it? How competently you're doing it? How much of a drain on your resource and your time is that? And these are all problems that we are looking to fix here at Cobweb with our third-party patch management solution via our managed service. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Ben, and who hopefully can enlighten you as to how to best move forward. Ben, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me to the webinar. It's great to be here. Gonna have a fun 15 minutes talking about the importance of patching. You'll never realize how exciting a topic this actually is, actually how important it is. My name's Ben. I'm from Patch My PC. I'm a systems architect. I've been working in IT for over 20 years, seen a thing or two. I've worked as a consultant and as a system admin, and I'm now working for a software vendor. So seen all sides of the fence, seen the challenges from multiple angles. So today I really want to focus on the importance of patching and just draw to the front of your mind the challenges there are. Like, what is patching? Why should I patch? What happens if I don't patch? And why should I bother patching? You know, I've been fine up until this point, so why should I even be considering it? So the first thing I want to look at is maybe taking a step back, and before we talk about patching, let's talk about vulnerabilities in general. You know, we see in this industry a growing trend in the frequency of cyber attacks. So it's increasing day on day, month on month. We actually work with a lot of companies, and a lot of them now are starting to employ some kind of cybersecurity training. Yeah. So we're all aware of the emails we get in saying, hey, free Amazon gift card, and we click it to see if it's an Amazon gift card. And, you know, if it's too good to be true, it's probably false. And we are starting to train our users to recognize these emails. And so they're typically a type of attack called a phishing attack. So you receive an email from somebody, the address looks familiar, but maybe it's not quite right. Maybe the domain on their email is slightly different. Maybe the body of the email has been constructed in a weird kind of way with some weird fonts, and maybe there's some spelling mistakes. So these are all good things to train our users on to spot what could be a malicious email. And by malicious, what I mean is, you know, they read the email, they click on a link in the email, and then suddenly their identity is stolen. You know, they get taken to a portal, they get asked to sign in, they're then given their username and password to an attacker, and they use that to laterally try and access all the other systems they think this company has using the same username and password. But this is something we're getting better at. We're giving our users training on this. A really huge attack surface area that is getting less attention, which needs your absolute attention, is patching systems. So user identity is a big thing, especially as we move away from the traditional, everything's in the data center, everything's in the office, I've got a firewall and everything's protected, to your users suddenly having to work from home and working from the coffee shop. The identity is really important to protect. But with that movement of users outside of the office sphere also comes, you've now got these distributed computers all over the place. You know, how are you protecting them? How are you making sure that the software on those computers is kept up to date? Because if they're not kept up to date, those devices will be vulnerable, and it's a matter of time before those vulnerabilities are possibly exposed by an attacker. So let's talk about some of the things that we see. When I talk about vulnerabilities, let me draw an analogy to a car. Yeah, so we have cars, maybe have bikes, maybe we have EV scooters, but they all require some kind of regular maintenance. I've just got a Peugeot 3008 for my family. It's a bit bigger, more reliable than my old Land Rover, and there is a common fault with it, which wasn't there when the car was manufactured. It's got a wet timing belt, and that wet timing belt breaks down after so many miles, and it clogs up the oil pump, and it's a huge repair bill. But that's a consequence of something that came after the car was manufactured. And this is, I want to draw this analogy to software. So software, when it's initially written, the coder doesn't anticipate that there's a problem with it. They've addressed all the vulnerabilities they know about, and they release the software. And then it's only like days, weeks, months later that there's a vulnerability in the code they've written, the platform the code is on. Maybe there's some libraries that the code relies on, and there's some vulnerabilities in those. But it's something that comes later, and it's something that absolutely needs to be addressed. When vulnerabilities are discovered in software, they are known as zero-day exploits, or exploitable zero-day. So as soon as the exploit is advertised, most exploits are publicly listed as a common vulnerability exposure. You may have seen the word CVE with a number after it. That's when a vulnerability to a system or a piece of software is well known and it's listed publicly. As soon as that happens, there are thousands of people trying to compromise systems that could be vulnerable to that exposure. Okay. And this is why, if your system isn't patched, you could be vulnerable. So let's have a look at kind of how that flow works. Here's just one example I picked. You know, when we talk about exposure to vulnerabilities, we can think of viruses, which are things that attach themselves to programs. We can think of worms, which are programs that get inside your system and then spread across the network. Another common attack, which I've highlighted on the screen here, is SQL injection. So you may have a system that's facing the internet that your customers sign into to put in their information. A well-known tactic is a SQL injection attempt. And so an attacker might pass a query like this, which is always going to return true to pull back information. So here is select star from the users table, where username equals nothing or 1 equals 1. 1 always equals 1. So if this system wasn't protected against this SQL injection attack, the attacker could exfiltrate all that information if the system isn't patched. So this is the kind of timeline that an attacker would typically follow. So a vulnerability would be discovered in a piece of software. An attacker would exploit it, either with a worm or a virus or SQL injection technique. They would then deploy malware or ransomware. So you might be familiar with WannaCry, was a famous ransomware hack that happened back in 2017. So ransomware, it's a worldwide disaster, really. 150 countries were affected. It was because of a vulnerability in a Microsoft Windows operating system, and it was pretty horrendous. So ransomware means an attacker has got in somehow through vulnerability. They've encrypted your systems, and they'll demand money for you to get back into those systems. WannaCry was demanding Bitcoin at the time. So ransomware encrypting systems so you can't access them is one thing, but data exfiltration, personal data, is a massive thing, because then you're talking about losing customer data. And if you lose customer data, you're going to tarnish your reputation is one thing. The other thing that will happen is that you will get fined by a body somewhere, depending on which country you're in. So why should you care? Well, here's a classic example of one of the biggest data breaches in history, with Equifax back in 2017. So Equifax were affected by an Apache vulnerability. Apache is a web server. So they had an exposed website front end that the public could access. It was actually the Chinese military, it was a state-sponsored actor who actually did the hack. There was a known vulnerability that was exposed in March 2017. This group of 4 hackers from China found a vulnerability in the Equifax system in May, so literally only 2 months after the vulnerability was announced. They managed to get into the system through various techniques. They installed their own web shell into that environment, which basically means, to cut a long story short, they could get into the internal PKI, the certificate authority. They could generate their own certificates to encrypt their own traffic. So they spread across 34 different servers in that environment. They ran 90,000 SQL queries against the Equifax data. All of the systems that they hacked, they were also deleting log files for those systems as they went along. So they're hiding their tracks, and everything was encrypted. Equifax had a system to flag suspicious traffic within their business, but the certificate used to flag that traffic had expired 90 days ago. So it was a real horror show. The attackers got in, they identified the vulnerability, they exploited the vulnerability, they installed their malware across 34 different servers. They pulled out a massive amount of personal data, 148 million US personal data records exposed. There are 11 million UK British driver license details stolen as well in this hack. We don't know where that data went, but we know the data was stolen, and they covered the tracks by deleting logs. Equifax were fined $575 million. That cost that company. They had a 13% drop in shares straight away. And I think the Financial Conduct Authority also fined them around £11 million for that data breach, because they had one piece of software that was not patched. This might sound quite, like I'm bigging up the risk here, but it's a real risk. The same group of hackers who are responsible for the Equifax hack also hacked into Marriott Hotels, business in the UK. And they also hacked a healthcare company called Anthem, and they stole about 78 million customer records. So the state-sponsored actors and other hackers don't just target the big companies. They're trawling the internet looking for people to attack. So it can be quite costly if you're not patching. Updating is pretty critical. 57% of data breaches could have been prevented by the systems being patched on time. And actually, it was ServiceNow who done this survey. They found that 34% of those companies knew that they weren't patching properly. They either couldn't afford it, which isn't a great excuse because it's not terribly expensive to patch your systems, or they just didn't have time to do it. They had more important things on their radar. You have to patch if you're trying to get accreditation as a company like ISO 27001, or you're trying to meet Cyber Essentials certification, which means all your online systems must be patched for critical vulnerabilities within 14 days. You have to have a patching strategy. Every 11 seconds, we've found that companies are hit by some kind of ransomware attempt, and the average cost of a data breach is around $4 million. So this is interesting. When we look across the different companies we work with, for a typical small business, you maybe have 172 different applications in your portfolio. 255 for a mid-sized company, and enterprises tend to have a bit more with their own line of business apps, around 664. So what does this mean? Well, I'm trying to paint the challenge of what patching actually is. So if we said 172 applications, well, how do I patch them? Somebody's going to have to go through the ecosystem, look for the software, and create the patch and deploy it in your environment for you. Time is your biggest challenge there. Okay, so what do they need to do? They need to find the software you have. So it could be Chrome, Firefox, Notepad, could be your CRM system, could be a printer package, could be anything. They need to identify that the vendor's released an update for it. They need to create a package for it manually. They need to test the package on some systems. They need to deploy it to a pilot group to ensure that it's successful. And there's a lot of time spent trying to understand, how do I deploy this? How do I make sure the deployment is silent? How do I notify the user if they need to close the app to make sure the installation is successful? There's a lot of moving parts. They'll need to validate the installation is successful. They need to release it to wider production, hopefully in a ring deployment, which means you're targeting one group of systems first. If that's successful, the next group of systems, and so on. And then rinse and repeat. Vendors don't just release a software update once and that's it. Chrome releases an update at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. Other vendors, you might be seeing updates. I think on average, we're looking at least 4 times a year for most vendors for updates. We estimate with all of those steps, so recognizing there's an update, testing it, deploying it, it's around 3.5 hours per update. Times that number by the number of applications you have, that is your biggest challenge, time. So if we say on average 4 hours per app to create an update, times 172 apps for the smallest company, that's 688 hours a year. Times that by an average of 4 updates per application a year, you're looking at 2,752 hours to create updates and test them and deploy them in your organization. That figure gets worse if you're a large or a mid-sized company. You're looking at 4,000 hours a year. Even if you used to be super conservative and you said, well, I can create a package in 3 hours. 3 hours for 172 apps, 4 updates a year, you're still looking at just over 2,000 hours in time to do that. And if we draw an illustration to like a typical work week, 37 and a half days a week. I've got that wrong. There's not 37.5 days a week, hours a week. The typical UK worker is working about 1,800 hours a year, taking into account bank holidays and time off. So you would need to employ somebody full time to just package apps. And that person would have to be skilled as well. So it's not a cheap thing to do. So I'll just skip to the next slide accidentally. So hopefully that I just wanted to draw to your attention the challenge of patching, why it's so important. Because you don't patch today, and you've maybe been lucky, that's not a position you should rest on. I'm an advocate that everybody should be patching. Microsoft have made it really simple for Windows updates. They have not made it simple for third-party patching. So I advocate what Cobweb are doing here in making that much easier for the customers. And that's the end of.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben. That's I really appreciate you going through that. It's really interesting and some quite scary quite scary
Some big
detail and
things.
some scary numbers. I think what I sort of was scribbling some stuff down there as you were speaking, and I've written down time, I've written down risk, I've written down cost. I think any of us who are in IT and cybersecurity, and anyone who's in business, anyone who's leading a business or leading an IT section of a business will understand the importance of managing their risk, of
Yeah.
managing their costs, um, the dangers of vulnerabilities. You have to be in this industry for about 5 minutes to realize the scale of increase in terms of the number of breaches. There's a whole bunch of different stats. I'd encourage people to go and take a look for their own, but I think
It's,
small businesses are infinitely more likely to be targeted than large businesses, which is kind of perhaps
Mhm.
works against what you might think to be true. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, completely agree. Some of the figures I shared may seem sensationalized, but they're real figures. This is a problem that every company faces if they're using IT. So it's not just the big companies that are getting targeted. It is everybody's being targeted.
great. No, thank you for that. So yeah, I think hopefully if we weren't clear on that before, we're now very conscious of the fact that there's a problem that absolutely needs to be addressed. The longer you leave vulnerabilities open, guess what? The more likely you are to succumb to problems that result from that. But you have to manage that against the cost of fixing stuff, like everything, right? There's a cost versus risk versus time versus everything else. So we'll hand over to Keir now. Keir, as I said at the top of the call, heads up the managed services division here at Cobweb, and Keir might hopefully shed a little more joy on what's been a sad and sorry story so far, and help bring some light to the end of the tunnel so far as um, bringing a solution to this particular problem. So, Keir, over to you.
So yes, so as Swan said, Ben has covered a lot of the dangers and the scary pieces in regards to a lot of the bad actors that are out there, and the Cobweb Managed Services is an option that our customers take in a way of helping them to protect themselves against this. First of all, just sort of covering what a Cobweb Managed Service is, and no matter what service that you take a managed service from us on, whether it be a cloud backup solution, workloads in Azure, or protecting your users and devices and tenant within M365, they all have the same three pillars of sort of functionality that we give to the customer. So first element is that reactive support. So this is your general sort of run-of-the-mill inbound break fix support that your users and your admins can use to reach out to our cloud experts on the support team to get them to help with any sort of issue that's related to the cloud system, be it issues with customers or users having issues with Outlook connecting, or they've got a new phone, they want MFA set up, or you just have a general question about your cloud service, that can all come in to that team through those reactive support lines with 24/7 support available for severity 1 issues that you need to raise. That's sort of the run-of-the-mill support. You get that with any provider, really. The real value that we then provide are the two proactive layers that are on top of that. The first of those is proactive monitoring. This is us with a tooling that links into your cloud service, and it will pick up various alerts when elements cross various thresholds. Would be that a backup failing in your backup platform, or if you've got a workload in Azure, it may have high, low performance, and then or a website going offline, all the way through to risky user alerts. Those will come into our tool. We'll log tickets for those, and then we'll start triaging, remediating, and then liaising with yourself to put those fixes in place. So essentially, Microsoft's platforms have numerous areas to go to with numerous alerts. If you don't have your eyes on them, then there's a lot of unknowns out there. We're essentially there to start shedding some light on the important and critical ones and work with you to fix and remediate those issues. So that's a proactive monitoring. That's us reacting to alerts on your behalf. And again, the final piece is proactive management. So this is, essentially, if you don't have any issues and you haven't called us, we haven't seen any alerts, so we haven't called you. The proactive management is the piece that will keep us busy on your behalf if everything in the Paradise world has gone smoothly. So this is us with a set of checks on varying cadences that will log a ticket, log into your platform, and do a variety of checks, be that against user security, vulnerability management within your devices, and just making sure that any configuration that is in place is then up to scratch and at best practice, along with any new features or functionality that Microsoft may have released within those systems. We'll then work with you to implement those. Obviously, for example, a customer, and this is the real value of this, the proactive management piece, a customer that comes in, if they only take reactive support and maybe a setup service from us, on day 0, they are going to be configured in a certain way to our best practice. 6 months down the line, they're then effectively 6 months out of date from our best practice. So whatever has been done, unless they have been proactively going in and keeping up to date with all the Microsoft changes and anything else that needs to get done, you will then be 6 months out of best practice configuration. So the managed service there is designed to sort of feed and water the platform and put those improvements back into your platform over that period. So you don't have to worry about it. And just sort of diving into one of them, obviously we're mainly here about the patch management, and a key component of our M365 managed service is that patch management. We've recently, over the sort of this calendar year, partnered with PatchMyPC to allow us to plug a gap in sort of customer security and configuration that we were identifying, and that is essentially that third-party patching. As Ben has said, Microsoft have conveniently made it very easy for us to patch their own applications, but have then made it increasingly more difficult to patch third-party applications. A lot of it is, as Ben was saying, for devices joined to Intune that have that centralized device management. You would have to be sort of reviewing what is installed, looking through the inventories, looking through what versions people have installed, and then manually creating application packages to then push out to your devices. Generally, then vendors will release more than one patch either every month or at least more than one every year. And so at that point, the amount of work just spirals out of control. So as part of the M365 managed service, one of our main features now is to onboard you onto our PatchMyPC instance, which will then automatically start scanning and assessing your tenant. That tooling can then scan all of the applications across all of the devices that it can see, and it will allow us to generate a report on what apps installed on those devices are supported to be patched by the tool. So currently, this is over 1,500 applications, with many more being added all the time. Obviously, there are also capabilities to, for niche applications, get them requested to be added to. So PatchMyPC can add them into their repository. We'll then work with you on deploying these updates into your tenant. The brilliance of this tool is that it will integrate into your deployment of Intune, and the updates will appear as native packages within Intune. It has advanced detection scripts wrapped around it so that we can enforce those updates onto all devices, but it will only install on devices that it detects those out-of-date applications on. So rather than having to know that Bob in finance or Jeff in accounts has a specific version of an app installed, if we know that that app is in your ecosystem, we can push it out to Intune and just say, install this on everywhere that you find it, and it will then update those devices to the latest builds. And you don't have to worry about, sometimes apps require end users to be able to open those apps, so it sort of self-updates within the app. This will do it without any user interaction, and that will be seamless to them in the background. So it effectively removes any legwork from people that are doing this at your end already. And if they aren't doing it, then it solves a fairly large security hole that has been discussed already. On top of that as well, what we can do as part of the service is we will work with you on what your company approved apps are. So we won't just push out updates to already installed apps, but obviously if a new starter joins your business, they're going to want to get their laptop up and running as soon as possible. So what we can do is, using the tooling, we can publish a repository of company approved apps through the company portal. So when they load up their laptop, they can choose to install Chrome or Firefox, 7-Zip, Zoom, whatever it is that they might want to install, that you've approved that your users should have access to. And the tooling will, on an ongoing basis, then republish those with the latest version. So whenever a new starter starts, they will always be able to choose and download the latest version. And then on an ongoing basis, the tooling will then automatically update those month to month. And that takes a large portion of noise out of a lot of the portals. Microsoft have vulnerability assessments within their dashboards. If you don't have third-party patching taken care of, then a lot of that vulnerability reporting is just swamped with out-of-date recommendations to patch out-of-date software. So once you can get a handle on that, it removes the noise of the sort of easy to fix or easy to fix by a patch issues that then leave you with actual issues that we can then look at and work to resolve with you. So the next slide also covers a lot of what else is in the M365 managed service as well. So devices is one area that is very important, and that's the reason why you're here today around the patching. Similarly, as Ben was saying, user identity and tenant security are big factors as well. So that proactive management piece, where we go in and look at checks and implement best practices for you, covers all three of those. So from a tenant level, we have a best practice secure score configuration. We'll go in and look to implement implement some additional tenant configuration, which will bump up your secure score, which is essentially a rating that Microsoft give you out of 100%. That shows how many of the how secure you are, how many of their recommended security features you have configured. So we see a lot of customers come on between the 20 to 30% mark. Our aim is generally to get people into the 60 to 80% mark, and that's a combination of configuration of better mail flow, better SharePoint permissions, better device security, better user security, and so on. And as I mentioned sort of earlier, those things are always changing. So even if you go in and fix everything now, 3-4 months down the line, that secure score would have dropped because new things would have appeared, and you will almost be back to square one again. So having that constant routine of looking at it on a weekly or monthly basis is key. And from a user point of view, again, identity is key to keeping your data secure. We have various checks around best practice around global admins, making sure that only the correct people are as with those elevated permissions, through to conditional access to make sure that all users are enforced to have multi-factor authentication and that there aren't any gaps in that, so users can't be created that get around that, so that if someone was attempting to brute force any of your accounts from sort of a different country or something along those lines, even if they get the password right, conditional access policies are there that MFA would be enforced, or even if they're from an untrusted country, conditional access can be there to stop that authentication attempt before it even occurs. And then there are more device checks as well. Having everything that we've spoken about up until now is all dependent on your devices being in the M365 Intune ecosystem. So if you have users that are logging onto devices, but they haven't enrolled them in Intune, they won't be getting any of this goodness that we've been speaking up until now about this patch management. So a lot of our checks also revolve around device coverage and device configuration. So that's making sure that if all of your users have a certain amount of devices, but all of those devices are in the right portals, configured in the right way, so that they will actually get these patches. As there's no point having a patching system that's deploying a lot of patches, but only one of your 50 users has a device that's in a position that will actually receive them. So we will work with you again just to make sure that everything is set up correctly, so that you are starting to get the goodness that is out the back of these patches. And then, as I said, there's some pieces there around the proactive monitoring there too, around some of the checks that we pick up around user risk detection. So if someone is trying to compromise one of your user accounts from another country, or sometimes it even flags as sort of false positives if someone has usually logs in from a London office but then goes on holiday and starts logging in from Spain or somewhere, then sometimes it can pick up that a user is logging in from an unusual location. So unless these things are being looked at and sort of checked and measured, then a lot of these things can go unknown in the background. And again, they just are unknown unknowns. So we're essentially there to shed some light on them.
Thanks, Keir. Appreciate your time there. So I think for me, the overriding message that I've got today, if we didn't know it before, that managing IT is a full-time job. Some of the statistics that Ben was talking about there, managing your patching can be a full-time job, let alone all the other things that Keir's walked through there around managing all the other elements of your IT infrastructure. You need to have eyes on this all the time. Now, this isn't necessarily about replacing your IT staff. I've spoken about this before in previous webinars and other conversations where for smaller businesses, often the IT person has multiple hats. There'll be the IT person, but there'll also be the company founder or one of the directors or something like that. And what we're advocating here, what we're suggesting here is actually giving them their time back to go and do what they do best and allow a managed service provider, an IT expert, to do what they do best and keep eyes on IT all the time and give you what you absolutely need, which is a full-time IT person. For a larger organization that has some kind of IT presence, that could be a great number of people in a great many cases. Again, this isn't about replacing any of those people. It's actually about giving them their time to go and do what is more proactive for their business. looking at PwC, I read the other day, I think their top 20 best performing companies all outsource to a managed service. And the reason for that isn't to replace IT people, as I say, it's to say, actually, use your IT people to differentiate yourself, to do things that make you better than your competition, to do things that are specific to your business or your industry, and allow the managed service providers to do the mundane stuff, the checks and measures, the making sure patching's done on time, and all those sorts of good things. So we talk about it here at Cobweb about, what a managed service gives you is an IT expert or an IT security expert that never goes away, that never sleeps, never goes on holiday, doesn't get sick. You've always got, the truth is, a team of people looking out for you. And I think that's just the most powerful thing is, do you want to go and employ an IT person or persons, or do you want to go employ more people to sell houses if you're an estate agent, or do someone's books if you're a finance house, or whatever it might be? That's really the true value of a managed service provider. The other thing, here is time. I think that's the thing that I've written down a number of times today and circled and underlined. Vulnerabilities, the longer they hang around, the more vulnerable you become. There are statistics out there about the average amount of time that it takes to patch. I think Ben touched on them. It's many days, sometimes it's many weeks. With a solution such as Patch My PC via a service provider like Cobweb, your time to patch turns into minutes or hours rather than days and weeks. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that means your risk is hugely reduced, and therefore your vulnerability is so much less. So that's really something to think about as we move on, as you leave today's call. I hope you found it of value. I hope it's been 45 minutes or thereabouts well spent. I don't know that we've had any questions. If we have, I think we're near the top of the time anyway. So maybe apologies. We'll come back to you if there are questions, and thank you for them. If you have any questions as you go away and carry on your day or your week, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone at Cobweb. There's a phone number there, email there. You can find me on LinkedIn, Keir, or Ben, I'm sure, and we'd be more than happy to help you and to offer you our guidance or assistance as best we can. Thank you for attending. You will receive a recording of this and the slides sent to your email, and feel free to look back, feel free to reach out, and thank you again for your time.